Hello and welcome to Whitwell and Anderson. This is the channel where we talk about financial, business, and historical and economic things in simple terms. We are on gentrification. This may be the 12th video on gentrification. I would suggest that you subscribe so you don't miss anything, and give it a thumbs up, and also ring the bell. So, what is gentrification? And we're going to talk about the city of Denver. Gentrification is basically displacement of one class of people by another class of people who basically have more money. That's what gentrification is. And it's a term that was coined by a lady named Ruth Glass in London when she was asked to do a survey on an area of London, and she coined the term gentrification. Gentrification comes from an old French term called gentry. And the gentry was the middle sector of the economy and society, the artisans, not the poor people and not the aristocrats, but in the middle. That's where gentry comes from. Now, you must destroy a community in order to gentrify it. And some of the tools that they use are redlining, which goes back to the 30s, where the Federal Housing Administration excluded loans to certain areas, reduction of services, so the schools decline, crime, restrictive covenants. And what that is basically something that's been used against not just black people, but Japanese and Irish, where you can't sell your home to a certain select group of people. There's a rent gap theory where eventually the cost of the rent exceeds the property value, property taxes. Blockbusting. Back in the 50s, it wouldn't be unusual for a real estate agent to pay an Afro-American lady to take a shopping cart or a cart with a child down the street in a white area and scare the white people that black people moving in. There's been cases where they have called up certain families, certain white families and communities, and asked for people with black names, and that sort of terrified them. One of the biggest things is the developers getting tax credits. That's really hurting. It's really hurting. Urban slum clearance, food deserts, pharmacy deserts, those things occur. I call it the whole food theory. Those left behind after an area is gentrified have nowhere to shop. They have nowhere to get their medicine. They can't afford being where the new environment they're in. Also, some of the terms that were used was eminent domain, which the government could come and give you what they call fair market value for your house. You have no choice, you have to take it. Let's talk now about Denver. Denver was founded in 1856. The Transcontinental Railroad was a critical piece for Denver. And over a 2-year period, over 100,000 people came to Colorado for the gold rush. They found out there wasn't much gold, but there was silver. In 1857 was the first worldwide recession, because at that time there was the cable that went from the United States to England. There was a transcontinental cable, and there were telegraphs. And Denver suffered quite awesome from that, quite badly from that. One of the things in Denver at that time, and still today, is housing problems. Not enough housing. Denver became a mecca of a transportation hub. In the 1860s, in the United States, there was a party called the Know Nothing Party. And their goal was they were anti-immigrant. And they played a major role in the United States to try to keep immigrants out. In the 1870s, the silver tycoons came in. And in 1893, there was another panic and the railroads collapsed. Now, in 1862, there was a land grant, Manifest Destiny, which the government gave people land grants if they moved out west and built themselves a home. Blacks were excluded from that. Denver was a well-known place for food, minerals, mining, wholesale trade, silver, ranching. And by the end of the Civil War, many people came to Denver for opportunities. For example, Denver was the 26th largest city in the United States in 1890, which is pretty astonishing if you think about it. In 1882, the Chinese Exclusion Act came in, and there were some Chinese in Denver. The Exclusion Act basically said that they didn't want Chinese to come to the United States. They were competing against jobs that Europeans were getting, and the government decided that they'd have to do something about that. In 1917, there was the Mexican Revolution. And that gave the opportunity for many Mexicans to move north to Denver. Skipping to World War I, there was a tremendous housing shortage, and Denver suffered from that drastically. In 1919, there was something called Red Summer, where there were multiple riots throughout the United States because of returning veterans. And again, the problem was housing. They did not have enough housing for people to live. So that became an issue. In 1890, again, the immigrants from Germany, Italy, the Jewish immigrants and the Irish came over. The Chinese and the Japanese came over in droves. Only 40 years later, there was the Dust Bowl, which was one of the worst ecological disasters in United States history, and that caused many deaths and set back the United States as far as the economy concerned. The New Deal occurred in 1933, where they established the federal housing loan program. As we said before, they were redlined. This is the first appearance of a 30-year mortgage. The Federal Highway Act initially came into place. Once again, blacks were excluded from getting the 30-year mortgages. Eminent domain destroyed black communities. And by 1947, there was a community called 5 Points in Denver that was gentrified, as well as an area called Japtown. In 1940 to 1970 was the second phase of the Great Migration. The first phase of the Great Migration was 1910 to 1930. That's when a lot of the blacks moved from the south to the north and to the west to get jobs. Along the time of the end of the World War II, there was the Veterans and GI Bill, which once again blacks were denied opportunity for that. And in 1957, the Federal Highways Act, which the federal government gave 50% of the revenue and the individual locality would come up with the other 50%, came into place. And the American highway system really got going. How that happened was Dwight D. Eisenhower back in 1919 drove from the East Coast to the West Coast, and it took him 62 days. So when he became president, he knew for national defense and with the advent of more cars, he'd have to build out a highway system. in 1969 was the Chicano movement in Denver. The 1970 oil crisis was a boom for Denver. Again, as in the rest of the country, not enough housing was developed. Skipping ahead to 1980, crime, lack of housing, drugs, white flight, decaying infrastructure. Denver suffered like other cities did. And by 2008, the housing crisis had played a major role in Denver. Then we come to COVID. Homelessness is fairly large. Yeah, Denver is one of the most gentrified cities in the United States. And mainly, another reason why they've been becoming gentrified is the build out of transit-oriented gentrification. What that means is basically when you put in the transit infrastructure, it tends to draw a different type of people to that area, more of an upscale type. People come to the area because of transportation. And again, that forces out the indigenous people that were there. Some of the gentrified areas are the north side, the east side, 5 Points, and something called Vinyl Street. I'd like to thank you very much for your time. Give me a thumbs up, subscribe, so you get more good data. Have a great day.